Today, we're going to talk about some small, almost invisible changes on our roads that are having a massive, life-saving impact, and you've probably driven past them 100 times without ever giving them a second thought.
So, picture your daily drive for a second. You're surrounded by signs, lights, road markings, all that stuff. But have you ever been driving along and noticed that the font on a highway sign looks, I don't know, just a little different than it used to?
It's so easy to just dismiss something like that, right? But that tiny detail, it's actually part of a much bigger story, one that comes from this fascinating report by the Michigan Department of Transportation. It's a story about how simple, data-driven engineering is making our commutes dramatically safer. And trust me, when we get to the numbers, the results are, well, they're just astounding.
So, to really get the solution, we first have to rewind and look at the problem that engineers were trying to solve. And it was this kind of hazard that was hiding in plain sight, right there in the crash data.
And at its heart, the problem really boils down to a very human question. For so many of us, driving is freedom, it's independence. But does it have to get more dangerous as we and our loved ones get older? Well, the data was definitely pointing to a worrying trend.
Okay, so check this out, because this slide really reveals the hidden problem. Look at the left side. Between 2004 and 2013, overall crashes in Michigan fell by almost 24%. I mean, that's a huge success, right? But now look at the right. For drivers aged 65 and older, the story completely flips on its head. Crashes in that group were actually going up. This was the alarm bell going off.
And that's exactly where this report comes in. Engineers got to work and they identified 5 specific, low-cost fixes designed to tackle the challenges older drivers can face. But here's the key. They ended up helping pretty much everyone on the road.
So the first fix goes right back to that question I asked at the very beginning. They switched from the standard font you see on the left to this new one called Clearview on the right. See how the letters in Clearview have just a little more open space inside them? That tiny change makes the words way easier to read from far away, and, this is crucial, it reduces that blurry glare you can get from bright headlights at night.
Second, they tackled intersection confusion with something called box span signals. So instead of that one diagonal wire with all the lights kind of bunched up in the middle, this setup puts a dedicated traffic signal right over each individual lane. The goal was super simple. Just eliminate any doubt about which light is for you. Third, and this one's for the pedestrians, they brought in the countdown signal. You know the old system on the left, just a flashing hand that gives you, well, basically no real information. But on the right, you get a precise number telling you exactly how many seconds you have left to cross. It just gives people the power to make a safer choice. Now, the final 2 fixes really work together as a team to improve clarity. First, they started using this ultra-bright fluorescent yellow sheeting to make warning signs basically impossible to miss. And second, at those really complex interchanges, they replaced the old confusing signs with this arrow per lane design you see on the right. The logic is so simple. The number of arrows now perfectly matches the number of lanes. No more last-second guesswork.
Okay, so the engineers implemented all these data-driven fixes. But that's only half the story, right? Did drivers actually notice? And more importantly, what did they think? To find out, researchers went out and surveyed over 1,500 people all across Michigan.
And for the most part, people loved the changes. Just take the pedestrian countdown signals. A staggering 93% of people preferred them. They said they felt safer, more informed, and more in control when they were crossing the street. I mean, that's a clear home run.
But this is where the story gets really, really interesting. Remember those new box band signals, the ones with a light over every single lane? Well, it turns out, drivers didn't like them. They actually said they preferred the old diagonal wire design because they felt it was easier to see. So if you were going by public opinion alone, you'd have to call this particular change a failure.
But here's the thing. Perception isn't always reality. This is the moment where we have to just ignore opinion and look at the cold, hard data. What actually happened to the number of crashes after these changes were made?
To measure this, safety experts use a tool called a crash modification factor, or a CMF. Think of it like a safety score. And all you really need to know is that any score below 1.0 is fantastic news. It means crashes went down. So a CMF of, say, 0.70, that actually means a 30% drop in crashes. So lower is always better.
And the results were just wow. Just upgrading the fonts and the materials on signs in urban areas cut crashes by nearly 30%. The new arrow per lane signs, a 42% reduction. And those pedestrian countdown signals, they led to an incredible 65% reduction in injuries for older pedestrians. I mean, these aren't small tweaks. These are massive life-saving improvements.
Now, I know what you're thinking. Okay, that's all great, but it must have cost an absolute fortune, right? Well, that brings us to what might be the most surprising part of this whole story, the return on investment. I mean, just look at these numbers. The extra cost to use the safer font on a brand new sign was just 41 bucks. The brighter yellow material, 46 bucks. Even the pedestrian countdown timer was only an extra $106 per unit. In the world of giant transportation budgets, this is practically pocket change.
And here is the real kicker. Remember those box span signals? The ones that drivers said they didn't like? Well, the crash data told a completely different story. For every single dollar spent installing them, the state got a $13 return in safety benefits. This is just a perfect example of why sometimes data has to trump opinion.
And then there's this number. This is the showstopper. For the simple act of upgrading signs with a better font and the brighter material, the benefit-to-cost ratio was 7,456 to 1. No, that is not a typo. It might be one of the single most effective safety investments ever made, anywhere.
So it all boils down to this really simple but really powerful idea. Making small, thoughtful, data-driven changes to our infrastructure is an incredibly smart investment. It proves that we don't always need massive, multi-billion-dollar projects to make a huge difference. Sometimes, the smartest fixes are the ones you barely even notice.
And that leaves us with one last question to think about. If a different font and a brighter color can save so many lives and return so much value, what other simple, invisible problems are out there on our roads, just waiting for a smart, simple solution?